He was born with no father. By the time he was 6, his mother was gone too. By 8, he had lost the grandfather who took him in. He grew up with almost nothing. No wealth, no formal schooling, no single protector he could count on for long. He grew up in a small trading town most of the world had never heard of. And yet, within his own lifetime, this same man united a region that had been torn apart by tribal war for centuries. He started a faith that today shapes the daily lives of nearly 2 billion people. His name was Muhammad, and the story of how an orphaned boy from a dusty trading town became one of the most consequential human beings in all of history begins in almost complete obscurity. It begins far from anything resembling power. Muhammad was born around the year 570 in the city of Mecca, in what is now Saudi Arabia. His father, Abdullah, died before Muhammad ever met him. Following local custom, his mother sent him out to the desert as a baby, to be raised for a few years by a Bedouin nurse named Halima. This was a common practice, believed to build strength, health, and clear speech away from crowded city life. When Muhammad returned to his mother, their time together was short. She died when he was only 6 years old, leaving him completely orphaned. His grandfather, a respected leader in Mecca, took him in next, but he too died just 2 years later. Custody finally passed to his uncle Abu Talib, a merchant who raised Muhammad as his own son, even though the family had little money to spare. Muhammad grew up working, first tending sheep on the hills outside Mecca, then joining trade caravans across the desert, learning the routes, the markets, and the value of a fair deal. On one early trip to Syria with his uncle, a Christian monk named Bahira reportedly took one look at the boy. He told Abu Talib to guard him closely, warning that great things awaited him. Most people around Muhammad, though, saw nothing more than an ordinary boy working hard to get by. Mecca at the time was ruled by tribal loyalty, wealth, and idol worship at a central shrine called the Kaaba. Muhammad had none of the first two, but he built something else instead, a reputation. Meccan merchants began calling him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. The name stuck with him for the rest of his life, and it would open a door no amount of money could have bought him. But what happened next was something no one in Mecca could have predicted. That reputation for honesty was about to change the entire course of his life. A wealthy widow named Khadija, who ran her own successful trading business, heard about the young man everyone called trustworthy. She hired him to lead one of her caravans to Syria, and the trip turned a solid profit. Impressed by his character as much as his results, Khadija proposed marriage herself, sending an intermediary on her behalf, a bold move for a woman of her standing in that society. Muhammad accepted. He was around 25, she was around 40, and considerably wealthier and more established than he was. It was, by any measure, an unusual match for the time, and it worked. Their marriage lasted 25 years, and for as long as she lived, Muhammad took no other wife. Khadija gave him financial stability for the first time in his life. She also gave him something else, the freedom to think. With money no longer a constant worry, Muhammad developed a habit that puzzled the people around him. He began retreating alone to a cave on a mountain outside Mecca called Hira, sometimes for days at a time, to sit in silence and reflect. He would spend entire nights there during the month Arabs called Ramadan, thinking about the corruption, violence, and idol worship he saw all around him in Mecca. In a city obsessed with trade, status, and tribal politics, a successful merchant choosing solitude over business looked strange to his neighbors. But Muhammad kept going back. Around the year 610, when he was about 40 years old, something happened inside that cave that would change not just his own life, but the course of world history. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad experienced something in the cave that terrified him. He described an overwhelming presence commanding him to recite words that were not his own, later understood as the first verses of what would become the Quran, the central holy book of Islam. Shaken and unsure what had happened to him, he ran home to Khadija, trembling, and asked her to cover him with a blanket. She comforted him. Then she consulted her cousin Waraka, a Christian scholar familiar with the stories of earlier prophets like Moses. Together, they came to believe that what had happened to her husband was real. He had received a message from God. Waraka told Muhammad that his experience matched the calling of prophets who had come before him. He warned that his own people would likely reject him, the same way earlier prophets had once been rejected. Khadija became the very first person to accept Muhammad's message. His young cousin Ali and his freed slave Zaid followed soon after. So did his close friend Abu Bakr, a respected merchant whose own standing in Mecca helped bring still more converts to the new faith. Muslims call this defining moment the start of his prophethood, the point where the merchant everyone trusted with money became a man claiming to carry a message from God himself. He began sharing that message quietly at first, then publicly. Mecca did not welcome it. The city's economy and religious identity were built around the Kaaba and its many idols. Muhammad's message threatened both. There was only one God, and wealth and tribal status meant nothing next to that. Powerful Meccan families turned against him. Early followers, especially poorer converts and enslaved people, were beaten and tortured for their faith. One enslaved convert, a man named Bilal, was reportedly pinned under heavy stones in the scorching desert sun for refusing to renounce his new faith. He survived and later became one of the most respected voices in the entire community. Eventually, Meccan leaders escalated even further. They imposed a total boycott on Muhammad's entire clan, cutting off all trade and marriage ties for roughly 3 years. Dozens of relatives, including children, were forced into a cramped mountain valley with dwindling food. Some reportedly resorted to eating leaves just to survive. The boycott eventually collapsed, but the hardship left its mark. Muhammad himself was mocked, threatened, and eventually targeted for assassination. His own clan tried to shield him, but even that protection had limits. For years, life in Mecca grew more dangerous with every convert he gained. Then, in a single year, Muhammad lost both people who had shielded him the longest. Khadija died, followed soon after by his uncle Abu Talib. Muslims still refer to this period as the Year of Sorrow. With Abu Talib gone, leadership of the clan passed to another uncle, far less willing to shield Muhammad from Mecca's growing hostility. Within weeks, threats against his life grew serious enough that Muhammad began quietly searching for a new city willing to take him in. But here's the part that history books almost never tell you. Facing near certain death in Mecca, Muhammad did not fight back with an army he did not have. He did something far riskier. He left everything behind and staked his entire mission on a single journey into the unknown. In the year 622, Muhammad and his followers slipped out of Mecca in secret and traveled roughly 200 miles to a city called Yathrib, later renamed Medina. For 3 days before that, Muhammad and his closest companion, Abu Bakr, hid inside a cave called Thawr. Meccan search parties combed the hills looking for them. At one point, reportedly standing right outside the cave entrance without ever looking in. This migration, known as the Hijra, was so significant that Muslims still use that year as the starting point of their calendar. In Medina, something remarkable happened. Local tribes were exhausted by generations of blood feuds that had cost countless lives over the decades. They invited Muhammad to serve not just as a religious teacher, but as a mediator and leader for the entire city. The penniless orphan who had once been chased out of his own hometown as a wanted man was now governing an entire city instead. One of his first acts was drafting an agreement, later known as the Constitution of Medina. It laid out rules for Muslims, Jewish tribes, and pagan clans to share the city peacefully. Each group kept its own faith and laws, while agreeing to defend Medina together against outside attack. Mecca, however, was not finished with him. Over the next several years, Meccan forces marched on Medina more than once, forcing the new community to fight simply to survive. Muhammad's followers won a stunning early victory at the Battle of Badr, despite being badly outnumbered. They then suffered a painful setback at Uhud. Later, they withstood a massive siege at Medina by digging a trench around the city, a defensive tactic so unfamiliar to Arab warfare that it caught the attackers completely off guard. The idea came from a Persian companion named Salman, who had seen similar defenses used in his homeland. Facing a trench too wide to cross on horseback, the massive coalition camped outside Medina for weeks before finally giving up and going home without ever breaching the city. Through it all, Muhammad's small community held together and kept growing. In 628, Muhammad tried something unexpected. Instead of marching on Mecca, he offered a peace treaty. Under the terms of Hudaybiyah, fighting would pause for 10 years, and Muslims would be allowed to make a peaceful pilgrimage to Mecca the following year. Many of his own followers saw it as a humiliating compromise. Some of the terms stung badly. Muhammad even agreed to return any Meccan who defected to his side, a condition his own companions found deeply unfair. It turned out to be the smartest move of his entire life. With the fighting paused, Muhammad's message spread across Arabia faster in 2 years of peace than it ever had during years of war. So, here is the real question this story has been building toward. An orphan with no army, no wealth, and no tribal power had somehow outmaneuvered the most powerful city in Arabia without a decisive battle. What happened next would decide whether any of it would last. Mecca broke the treaty first, attacking an allied tribe of Muhammad's. In 630, Muhammad marched on the city that had once tried to kill him, this time with an army of 10,000 men behind him. Mecca's leaders, certain they were about to be destroyed, surrendered without a real fight. Picture the scene. The same streets that once chased Muhammad out under threat of death now stand silent. They wait to see what he will do with total power over the very people who tortured his followers for over a decade. What Muhammad did next stunned everyone on both sides. Instead of ordering revenge on the men who had tortured his followers and hunted him for years, he granted a general amnesty. He even declared that anyone who took refuge inside the house of Abu Sufyan would be safe. Abu Sufyan was the very Meccan leader who had led armies against him for years, and his home became a place of protection. He walked to the Kaaba, the same shrine his message had once threatened, and cleared out the idols inside it, rededicating the site to the worship of one God. The city that exiled a penniless orphan now belonged, without a single act of vengeance, to the very man it had tried to erase. By the time of his final pilgrimage to Mecca in 632, Most of Arabia had united under his leadership. It was a region that had never once been unified by any king, tribe, or empire before him. During that pilgrimage, he delivered what is remembered as his farewell sermon. He called for equality between people regardless of race or wealth, protection for women, and an end to the endless tribal blood feuds that had defined Arabia for generations. He reminded the huge crowd gathered around him that no person was superior to another except through good conduct. It was a radical statement in a society still built almost entirely on tribal rank and bloodline. Months later, in June of 632, Muhammad fell ill and died in Medina, in the home of one of his wives, surrounded by his closest companions. His death hit the young community so hard that some followers, in shock, initially refused to believe it. Abu Bakr, his oldest friend, addressed the grieving crowd and reminded them that Muhammad was a man and that the God he had preached about had never died at all. That single reminder helped hold the fragile new community together at its most fragile moment. He left behind no empire in the traditional sense, no dynasty built on conquest for its own sake. He left behind a united Arabia and a holy text his followers preserved word for word through careful memorization and early written copies. He left behind a message that would carry far beyond the desert he was born into. Within a century of his death, that message had spread from Spain to the borders of India. It spread faster than almost any empire in history had ever expanded by the sword alone, carried instead by traders, scholars, and ordinary believers who simply kept passing it on. That kind of growth raises an honest question about power itself. Muhammad ended up with more real authority over more people than almost any Arab leader before him. Yet the thing that carried his message the farthest was never the size of his army. It was the fact that ordinary people, generation after generation, kept choosing to pass it on themselves. Today, roughly 1 out of every 4 people on earth follows the faith that began inside a single cave with one frightened man and a message he never asked for. The boy with no father, no mother, and no guaranteed place in the world became the reason nearly 2 billion people today pray facing the same direction. They read the same words and trace their faith back to the same cave outside Mecca. Muhammad never set out to build an empire. He set out to deliver a message and trusted the message to outlast him. He held political power over most of Arabia by the end of his life. Yet, by every account, he continued living simply, mending his own clothes and sharing meals with servants, rather than adopting the royal trappings other rulers of his era took for granted. That, as much as anything he built, is what his closest companions remembered most about him. It did outlast him by well over 1,000 years, and counting. It was carried not by soldiers guarding his memory, but by ordinary families teaching it to their children, generation after generation, right up to today. Sometimes, the people history remembers longest are not the ones who chased power, but the ones who were simply asked to carry something bigger than themselves and said yes. If this story gave you a new appreciation for how one person's life can reshape the world, hit the like button. It helps more people find this story